as I'm busy waiting for parts for the Riley, including the bearing that goes in the end of the torque tube and the 5/16 bolts that bolt the hubs to the little backing plates, as well as 1/4-inch bolts for the clutch. I did have some 1/4-inch bolts for those, and the threads, because they were bolts, the unthreaded portion was too long, so the threaded part wasn't long enough. So I did run a tap down them, but I'm not sure I'm happy with where the thread transitioned from the thread that was on the bolts to where the new thread is cut. I'm just worried that could be a weak point. I'm not sure that it would be or not. It shouldn't be, really. It should have just cut the thread all the way down. So I do have these bolts in here now, but I have ordered some newer ones, which should go better. They're actually set screws, so they're threaded all the way down, which may be better for bolting this on. I'm not sure exactly, but I need those so I can take this and all the engine rotating parts off to be balanced. Then I can start assembling the engine. So I've done an order for some nuts and bolts. I had to get them from the UK. In the past, I've used Thomas Smith fasteners, who are really good, but the shipping prices now are ridiculous. So I think for a £16 order, pound sterling, of various screws and set screws and bits and pieces, it was £16 for the hardware, and I think it was £24 for the shipping, which is just mad. So I ended up going through Namrick, who I've also used in the past, and they were pretty good. Their shipping, international shipping, is just the normal first class UK post shipping. So I ordered a few more nuts and bolts and things through them. I think it was, I can't remember exactly how much, but the whole order plus the shipping was only £40, so 80 New Zealand dollars, which is a lot more reasonable. I just have this mental block where if I'm ordering something from overseas, if the postage is going to be more than the thing I'm ordering, I don't like spending the money on the postage. So SU, the Berlin SU carburetor people are another good example of that, where their minimum postage rate seems to be ridiculous for some reason. Even if you just buy one needle, it's £20 or something for the postage out to New Zealand, which is just a bit too much unless I'm doing a decent size order. So I'm waiting until I've built up enough bits and pieces that I need from them, and then I'll do one big order. But all those nuts and bolts are on the way. Then I can start assembling the engine. I've got a lot of the hardware I need because I did an order with the spares and that came through. I've ordered a wire brush for this. I decided that would be more useful because this is a vapor rust here. I end up with a lot of nuts and bolts that I need to clean up. So these are 7/16, I think, which are what I need on the rear spring hangers, the rear trunnions. So I did find that on the parts car I had a set of those, so I am going to clean those up. I've actually ordered new ones as well because they're cheap, apart from the postage. But I think my vapor rust has stopped working now, because normally it would clean these up really well. I think it's getting a bit old. But with a wire wheel on here, I can clean up things like that. Obviously not holding them by hand, but that's the idea anyway. So while I'm waiting for a lot of things, I did paint the steering column, and I was just playing around with what the actual seating position in this car is going to be like. The back of the seat is pretty much here, and it's reasonably straight. It doesn't have a lot of rake to it. So the seat bottom, or rather your bottom, is about here. So you can see it's a tight fit in this car, and you're sitting lower than your feet effectively. So it is very low down. But all that has to wait until parts arrive, so I thought I'm going to have to start looking at some of the other bits and pieces. The carburetors I've already got. I rebuilt those ages ago. They're not exactly right. They should be OM1s, I think, but the ones I've got are H1s, H2s. Similar, basically exactly the same, but the flanges are slightly different on them, but they'll work. They're the right size. Ideally, I would actually go up a little bit to 1.125", I think. But the two 1-inch ones should work fine. But I'm going to start looking at the starter motors I've got, and this is the Dynamo I've got. I do actually have another Dynamo over there. I just realized that came off the parts car as well. It was in that metal box. So I've started taking this apart. One of the reasons I wanted to film this was just so I remember where all the wires and things go. It's really filthy. It does turn, which is always good. I've undone all the screws around here, which looking at it, I think that's how you get into this. I haven't tried yet. I may end up replacing some of these because it's all a mismatched set of screws, which just kind of annoys me. But that's easy enough. Of course, I figured this out after I've done the order for hardware to the UK, but never mind. So I'm going to go and see if I can now get this apart and see what it looks like inside. There was one piece that worried me somewhere. I thought it was a loose wire. Yeah, there. I'm not sure if we can see that. But I think that's actually string, effectively. I think that's that string around the end of the winding. I'll know more when I pull that apart. But the commutator on it looks okay. It doesn't look overly worn. Maybe it's been machined down, but it looks reasonably clean. I've been spraying it with carb cleaner, but it's just so filthy inside. It cleans up and then just gets immediately filthy again. So the whole thing needs a strip and clean. This is why I am perpetually confused by this old car. All the parts are different. So I got the other Dynamo off the shelf, just to have a look at it and compare. And it's two different models of Dynamo. They're both Rotax, which is correct. This one seems to be labeled AT145, 12 volt, 12 amp. And just realized I've written that down wrong. 12 amp. 2 amps wouldn't get you far. And this one is a Rotax model AT166-0, and then it looks like type CHI 0 or CH10. So again, I'm going to have to look up and see which one is correct. They do both turn, which is good. This has the dog, which this basically fits into the nut on the end of the crankshaft. So that engages with that, and the whole thing bolts on the front here with these three studs. They do both fit, so it's a matter of finding out which is the correct one. Or it may be a matter of which one works. I don't know if either of them work. I did notice that as well as all the screws on the front of this being wrong, the cover's missing. That's easy enough. I could always make a new cover, especially as I've got one here as a pattern. But all the screws are missing from around the back here as well. So this has probably been opened up in the past. Looks like somebody's gone mad with punching around the screws that I'm guessing are what's holding this bearing in. It's hard to tell. It might be the same on this one. So I haven't figured out exactly how you get this top off yet. I think I need to undo these, which seem to be for adjusting the brushes, and I've soaked them with some penetrant to see if that helps. Given that this isn't bolted on, I'm assuming this should maybe just knock off there. So I'll give that a gentle tap with a brass hammer and see what happens. So yes, it turns out there wasn't anything in particular holding this on, it just came off easily. But the interesting thing is these screws go into this ring, but they weren't done up, because otherwise that should have stopped that coming off. It hasn't stripped the threads, and one of the screws is actually missing, so I think this has been slightly dismantled in the past and then just never put together again properly. Maybe that means it's no good. I'm not sure, but I'm going to keep stripping it down and just see what's going on. I got the rest of this apart pretty easily. This is the bearing up the other end. I haven't removed it from the little brass holder. This bearing's a sealed one and it feels okay. This was the bearing in the other end, which may be the original one. I think it's German, FAG LS8. And this one, I've sprayed it out, but it feels a bit gritty. It is actually still gritty, it's still not clean, but it just doesn't feel right. It feels like there's pitting or something. I'll give it another good clean, or a proper clean, and see if it feels any better. But don't imagine these are too difficult to get, hopefully. I managed to pull the rotating assembly out. You can see somebody's had a go at it with pliers or vice grips or something, which is really annoying when you've got a tapered surface like that. Just damaging the taper. And this end, which is where the starter handle would engage. Even though I don't think these cars actually, I don't know if the Brooklyns ever had starting handles or not. I'm trying to remember with all the photos I've looked at if I've seen any originals with them. But the brushes look okay, but they've probably been machined down. The thing I thought might have been a loose wire is just the string that they used to tie the windings down coming undone. So I imagine that can all be redone. What I should probably do is get a multimeter on these. That's going to take ages. And check the conductivity through them to make sure the windings aren't broken, and check that there aren't any shorts. So I may do that. I'm just about to remove the brush holder parts. So I've loosened the screws off after soaking them, and I just wanted to make sure I remember which way round they go. This seems to be the one with two brushes, goes on the inside. This has definitely been taken apart before because this brush isn't actually connected. It's just loose. You can sort of see it floating around in there. So hopefully now I can get these out. They look like they're coming out. I think I need to loosen the screws off a bit more, and then hopefully they should come out. Although I may need to disconnect a wire down this end, because the other thing I can do is, oh, you can see inside here is filthy, is check these windings and make sure they're not shorted out or broken. So it looks like the field coils, oh, if I can balance this, these four coils here are wired in series, and the end of one goes outside to this terminal, and the end of the other one goes down to the narrow brush, which makes sense. So there's two main brushes which are quite thick, if you can see them. It's a bit hard to see. And then there's a separate narrower brush that's adjustable, which controls the charging rate. So that should rotate around. So I guess what that's controlling is how much current goes into these field coils to regulate the amount of power the dynamo is producing. The Austin 7 one is similar. It's a 3-brush arrangement, and you shift the position of the brush to change the output of the dynamo. But you have to be careful you don't go too far, because it can end up getting too hot, and it ends up melting the solder out of here, and it just, because it's rotating and it's hot and it's molten, it just flings it all out. Apparently it causes a real mess. So I just want to make sure I know how this comes apart, so I know how to put it back together. I don't know if I should be removing these coils or not. I know on the later ones where they're sort of screwed in, they're very, very tight. So they recommend that you don't undo them, because there was a special tool that you had to use, special screwdriver, to do them back up again. But this one seems to be bolted. So I don't know if that means this is safer to undo or not. I'm going to go and research that a bit. But I want to try and get the brush assembly out of there, because it's the only way I can really clean it up. So this little nut on here is a 4BA, and luckily it turns out I have the correct little tiny baby spanner for that. It's very handy. Just another quick detail for myself. It turns out you can't remove the brush things without taking out the field coils. They need to come out that way. So I've taken off the little connector block, and just want to make sure I remember which way round these wires go. So this is the field coil here, with the yellow wire coming out to this side. The other one is now disconnected from the brush, and this goes down to the other brush. So that goes down to there, so I should be able to pull that out through the top. That all came apart suspiciously easily. These bolts that were in here weren't really tight at all, so it didn't take much to get them undone. And these are the little metal pieces that go inside the coils. They just bolted into those. The brushes came out fine. They seem okay. They're a little bit battered. They're just some sort of cast metal, so I'm imagining they're a little bit fragile, and you can sort of see where they've been damaged a bit in the past. But I think that's probably repairable. I think I'd repair that with some epoxy, and then just re-tap the holes. But all of this needs a really good clean out. It's just filthy. These are the two main brushes, which are fixed at 90 degrees apart. The springs on these seem good still, and this bracket all seems good. So I think I should be able to clean those up. And you can see the insulation is coming off one of the wires down here. This tape stuff is just covered in oil. Really, really grotty. I don't know if this means somebody's been at it before. It looks like it. This looks like more modern plastics and things. There's just random bits of sort of cloth tape all over the place. So I'm hoping I can really carefully clean these up. I don't know what the best thing to do is, if I could use degreaser, but I don't know what I can use that's not going to just dissolve the tape. The bits between the coils I can re-insulate. Not sure what the best thing to use is actually, but I do have other sort of cloth electrical tape. This is just so sticky. I just have to be really careful that I don't break any of the wires, but even that wouldn't be too big a problem because you could splice them relatively easily. The inside of the casing is equally disgusting. Just a massive buildup of grease and oil and stuff. But at least with that apart now, I can clean it up. A 12 amp dynamo seems pretty low. We kind of have that issue with the Austin 7s as well, but it's not too much of a problem if you're not doing a lot of nighttime driving. So Also on this car, it doesn't have a coil because it's driven by a magneto, so you don't have the ignition coil there, which normally draws a few amps. So I'm guessing the only thing the Dynamo is really doing is driving the lights and recharging the battery that the starter uses. So for me, given this car, it's going to be a fun car. It's not going to be driven really long distances. You can actually drive a hell of a long way on a decent modern battery, and there's plenty of room to put a battery. I think the battery on these, I don't know where it went originally on the Brooklyns, but in a lot of the rebuilt ones I've seen in the replicas, they have it sat in here behind the driver's seat. So I'm not too worried about that. You can run a long way on a car just on the battery. I guess the other thing on this car would be the electric SU fuel pump. But again, you'd go a very long way running a fuel pump just on a decent 12-volt battery. So this may be the correct one for this car. This one definitely seems a lot bigger. So I'll have to look up the numbers for this and see what the output of this one is. Yeah, I guess the only thing I can do is clean it up, put it back together, spin it, and see if it actually works. Cleaning up the housing and the end cap and the little steel blocks that hold the coils in this degreaser I've got. This is the first time I've ever tried using this particular one. It's a CRC one. Apparently it's pH neutral, non-corrosive, solvent-free, non-flammable, rust inhibitor, non-toxic and biodegradable. Which makes me surprised it does anything at all, but it's actually working pretty well. It cleaned this up really well. Probably needs a little bit more scrubbing. Usually you can tell if a degreaser is good or not if it leaves your brushes clean. This one's still a bit grubby. But you'd think if it was a decent degreaser, it would take all the grease off your brushes as well as your parts. So I've got those soaking in there. I don't know if it's safe to put these in or not, or if it's just going to make this cloth tape completely disintegrate. Although there's a bit there that's coming off, so maybe what I'll do is I'll cut that off and leave that soaking in it and see what effect it has on it. It should be safe to put this in there, I think. Because this should all be sealed. It's just wires and things. It's just fully apart and reasonably cleaned up apart from the coils at the moment. The rest of it cleaned up pretty well. I just really quickly cleaned the rotating assembly in the degreaser just to get the worst of it off, and then basically put it in my little toaster oven at a low heat, about 50 degrees C, just to dry it out. But the cable, the string they use to tie everything up had gone all brittle and rotten at the end. So this was just kind of snapping. You can see it's wound around there and also around these. So I think what I can do is, I think the string around here seems okay. So this all seems quite strong still, so I can tie this off, and then I'm pretty sure the string, this cable, is the same as cable lacing cable, which I've actually got some of. So I will just retie this nice and tight, and then possibly spray this whole thing with conformal coating, which is what you use on printed circuit boards and things like that to make them waterproof and arc proof and that sort of thing. You can just buy it in a spray can from RS or Farnell, places like that. I still need to actually measure this to make sure it's all okay. I think the commutator looks okay. I don't know if it's been cut down or not, but it's definitely smooth. The brushes, I don't know what length they should be to start off with. I'll see if I can get new ones anyway. Just because it's probably a good idea to replace those unless these are new. But I'm not really sure. The housings and everything cleaned up okay, the brass bits cleaned up fine. This bearing is knackered. After I cleaned it all out, it barely turns. It's all rusted. The sealed one seems okay, and I suspect that's fairly recent. So I think somebody half rebuilt this, but never really finished or never put it back together. I'll see how much this bearing is. If they're cheap enough, I'll just replace them all once I've done all the electrical tests and see if it's actually worth doing it. It should be, because there's not really a lot to these. It's just some coils and a rotating bit and some brushes. The casings I'm going to leave sitting in the degreaser just overnight. It's pretty diluted down, so it's not going to affect those. And then what I may do is mask off the inside of it and put the outside in through the blasting cabinet just to clean the old paint off, and then repaint the outside. I'm guessing there's some sort of screw cap that goes on the end here. I don't have that. I don't know what is supposed to go on there, so that may be something I can try and machine up. That would be a good little project, trying to cut an inside thread for that, if those aren't available. The little ultrasonic cleaner, which is really meant for jewellery and stuff, did okay on these, but really one day I need to get a proper industrial one. And I think this degreaser would actually work reasonably well on one of those. It seemed to work pretty well on the little one. And then these screws that hold the coil pieces in. Again, this is one of those places where I need the wire wheel on the little bench grinder just to clean those up. They've been through the degreaser. Normally I would do that sort of thing on a drill. Using this, you can see that's pretty worn out, that wire brush. It used to be quite a bit bigger, but when it gets to this stage, it's actually quite good because it's not that harsh. So it cleans things like that up pretty well. But I think that's probably enough for tonight. I do have a little piece of this tape that's wrapping these windings soaking in the degreaser. I'm going to leave that overnight and see if it disintegrates at all. But if anyone's got any suggestions for what the best thing to clean those up would be, they're still all sticky and old grease and oil and stuff. It would be good to know what's a good thing to clean it with that's not going to actually damage it at all. One final thing, seeing as I do have to replace this bearing anyway, I'm wondering if a modern sealed bearing like this one is a better idea, because this bearing fits in there and that fits into the back of that, and then there are some screws that hold it. Looking at this other one, this is the drive dog that turns it from that crank nut, and the only thing I can see that stops oil getting in there is the fact that this has a oil slinging groove machined into it. So that basically fits in there, but there's nothing else that stops oil, as far as I can see, from coming through here, which seems a bit odd, because this is the end of the crank nut, so that goes straight into the crankcase. I mean, you have got that bearing there, but the oil pump and everything's in here, so I don't think this is full of oil, but there is definitely oil behind there. I'm just not sure how much. But I think a sealed bearing behind this is going to help. It's going to help stop oil getting into the dynamo.